Hi everyone. I can just see some people strolling in back, but thank you very much for staying on or deciding to come back in for this talk. So just because it's after lunch and a little bit of slumber might be settling in, uh, I figured maybe we can take slightly interactive approach here. Okay. So how many of you speak Marathi? Lovely, lovely. Okay. So I'm a girl. मी नागपूरची मुलगी आहे. Okay. So at points in the talk, we will pause, and I will say "Atta कसं वाटतं?" and I want you to say "छान छान वाटतं." Yes? Shall we practice till more people come in? "Atta कसं वाटतं?" ऐकू येत नाहीये मला. "आता कसं वाटतं?" That's nice. Okay. So I'm hoping Chan Chan Vatta to understand more about the brain. Okay. So I will talk to you a little bit about how the brain tries to learn to read, and let's see how much of this that you already knew about. Okay. So one interesting factor that we now know, and I want you to look at the slide here, is that the human brain is wired for language. Okay. So there is already an area of the brain that is specialized for language. So if you live in a home where people are talking to you, looking at you, engaging with you, you will learn to speak. Okay? But reading is something that was created by human beings. Okay? So it's a cultural invention by men and women. Okay? So an important part of this whole conversation is language is caught, but reading is taught. So unless you teach the brain how to read, it will not learn how to read. But you probably all know that reading is now a necessity of the modern world. It's one of the reasons why you are able to read my slides. Okay? And we are able to do the process of learning to read because of a superpower that we were just talking about a few minutes ago at a neurodiversity panel, too. That superpower is neuroplasticity. Okay? It's the ability of the brain to change, and it's the ability of the brain to be malleable. Okay? So just like you go to a gym and practice and build the muscle, similarly you can think of the brain as a muscle. Okay? And what you need to teach the brain is how to connect different parts of the brain so that a reading circuit happens. Okay? So that's what we call neuroplasticity. And it's the ability of the brain to change throughout your life because of external input. It's the learning in the classroom that changes your brain for life. So, one important thing that you need to remember is after this talk, I would have also changed your brain a little bit. And so have all the talks that you have listened to today, because you've acquired new information and probably established some new connections. Some fabulous ways in which this neuroplasticity manifests is in structural changes in the brain. And the image that you see on the right is actually how the connections between different neurons change. And so you'll be amazed to know that taxi drivers in London when they were imaged under an MRI scanner, actually showed changes in one part of the brain because of spatial navigation skills. Similarly, when we worked with pandits who learned to chant long mantras, they are 400 pages long mantras. There is a particular part of the brain that actually undergoes a change, and we call them verbal memory specialists. So, spatial navigation causes a different change, and learning of long texts causes a different change. And then there's functional plasticity, where there's a difference in brain function which manifests in reading networks. And it's because of functional plasticity that you actually learn to read. Okay? And so, reading is one of the most elegant examples of neuroplasticity. So, neurons in the brain that were meant for seeing, which are sitting at the back of your brain, connect with neurons which are sitting above your ear, which are meant for listening, which in turn connect with neurons sitting in the front of your brain, which is meant for language. So all these connect together to form a reading circuit, and that's how that gets created. Okay. And that's what we look at a little more in detail. Okay. So before we go forward, let's pause a little bit. And this is one thing I want you to be able to take away from this talk and be able to share it with one more person at home that you go to. Okay. So free up your hands, put your mobile phones away, and at the back of your brain here is the visual cortex. What allows you to see. Okay. On top of your ears is the temporal lobe, which is where all of auditory processing happens, hearing happens. Here is the parietal lobe, where you do sequencing, number processing, all of that. And this is the frontal lobe. Okay. This is what processes language, executive function. This area is what has expanded in humans along the mammalian evolution, which has made human beings in some ways, or so we think, the superior species. Okay. So it's the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the visual cortex. It's also called the occipital lobe. Okay. Now we know also in neuroscience that when learning happens in the classroom, learning is a pleasurable activity. It should activate reward circuits. Okay? There's a region in the brain called the nucleus accumbens that lights up whenever you eat a bar of chocolate, you listen to a good piece of music, you express your love for somebody, somebody else loves you, and when you learn to read. So, आता कसं वाटतं? छान छान नाही वाटतं? मग काय नाही शिकलं? Okay? So, visual cortex, temporal lobe, parietal lobe, frontal lobe. Must take away this learning, and let's hope it's been rewarding. So now, this is how the brain is situated when children come to the classroom. Okay? And what you're required to do is to take components of language that children already have. They have whole language. Children come to school speaking words. What teachers need to do is break down those words into components. So the example I've taken here is cat, and it's k, a, and t. So k can be mapped to the symbol for k, a can be mapped to the symbol for a or a, and t can be mapped for the symbol for t. Okay. So all these things have to happen in order for that reading circuit to get built in. Look at the triangle that I've put up there. Okay. So that's the visual cortex, because you have symbols, you have sounds, and then the whole thing has to be sequenced together, assembled together to activate the word cat, which is actually what you want to teach the child to learn. Okay. So it's called phonology, which is the sounds, orthography, which is the letters, and language, which actually brings all of it together for comprehension. So reading is one of the most difficult things that we can teach in the classroom. And it's important to realize that there is now a science to this reading. Okay? This process of making new connections is what happens because of neuroplasticity. And when you practice this again and again and again, you create the Google map for reading. Okay. You want to make this into an automatic map so that children become proficient in doing this. And look how beautiful the fibers in the brain look when you actually make these connections together. This is what is called a structural, a diffusion tensor imaging extraction, where you actually look at the connectivity that happens in the brain. Okay. But what I've talked to you now is the fact that unlike language, where only one area was participating, in reading, there are a multitude of areas that are participating. So a whole reading circuit has to get formed, and all of them have to work together for this to function optimally. As you begin to become a more proficient reader, there is one part of your brain which is sitting over here. Okay, it's called the superior temporal gyrus, or the visual word form area. Okay, that becomes specialized for reading. So the human brain decides to allocate a part of tissue only for reading because you do it so much. That's a specialization that they start to do. And we will talk about this in a minute some more, because when this does specialization does not happen is when you might have children who might be at risk for dyslexia. Okay. And that's why recognizing that this is a signature of proficient reading made a very big difference to the world of reading. What I also want you to realize is the remarkable ability that you have developed as a consequence of learning this. You are able to read people's handwritings, you are able to read different fonts, all of that, even though you were probably taught in only one particular way. That's how specialized and good we all become at the level of reading. Okay. But I've only scratched the surface. Okay. There are a number of other phenomena that are also happening at the cognitive process level, which is at the level of, say, working memory. You were taught a rule, but how do you make sure that rule actually was retained and practiced? So there is an area involved for working memory that gets involved. Then, as reading gets more complex, you need to understand rules of grammar. Those need to come in. So finally, when you look at an adult circuit for reading, you can see a large part of the brain that gets involved. In short, what we now know is reading transforms the brain. It builds connectivity across both hemispheres. Because remember, once you've learned to read, you're developing a whole additional vocabulary, and a whole new world is opening up to you in terms of imagination, in terms of learning new words, in terms of learning about new cultures. So much more develops. And that's why reading is so important. So, why did reading develop at all? And we now know that reading developed to be able to encode spoken language. So, the writing system, the rules that govern how sounds and letters are mapped, depends on the spoken language that you are trying to encode. And you all know that in India we speak multiple languages. Okay. In many ways, a lot of that mapping is much simpler than what we teach in English. Okay. So it makes a lot of sense to be able to expose our children to a writing system which is actually simpler or more transparent to learn, as opposed to more difficult systems. And that's a little bit of what we started to study. That in India, we have a population which is not only bilingual, but we are biliterate. So we learn to speak multiple languages. We also learn to read multiple languages. We are the only country in the world whereby the ages of 6 years, children can read two different writing systems, in some cases, even three. So it's quite remarkable how the brain reorganizes itself when we are learning to read different writing systems. Okay? I won't get into the details between what differentiates English and Hindi, but for a prototype example, I'm using that right now. And we brought in children from a school. This study was done way back in 2015, from a school into the laboratory at the National Brain Research Center. And we put them in an MRI scanner. This was, of course, done with ethical approval, parental approval, and in many cases, the parents also came and did the experiment before their children came and did this. And what children between 8 and 10 years did was they were lying in the scanner and they read words that we flashed to them. Okay? They read words as well as non words. Okay? So, an important thing that you will recognize about reading is every time you read a word that you have seen before, you read it much faster as opposed to a new word that you might be encountering. Okay. So there you actually have to pause and read more slowly. So, if you've understood the rules of reading, it manifests in being able to read even new words correctly. So we looked at them first behaviorally outside the scanner and then inside the MRI scanner. And here were two interesting findings that we found. Oral language, children who have excellent oral language and a large vocabulary, that's the best predictor on how well the child is going to learn to read. And the second is literacy in the mother tongue. So when you're teaching children to read two writing systems, literacy in the mother tongue predicts how well literacy will develop in the second language. The value to this is clearly quite evident. When children come to school, they probably come in with the mother tongue. Okay? So they have a vocabulary that is available to them. You teach reading to scaffold that vocabulary. Once they understand those rules of sound, letter, language mapping, then you introduce them to the new language. If they don't have an understanding or a vocabulary, the only way they can learn the second language is by rote memorization. Okay? I can already see some of you nodding off. So let's pause a little bit and do a little reality check. There's been lots of learning, so आता कसं वाटतं? छान छान नाही वाटतं एकदम. Once again, आता कसं वाटतं? Still not loud enough for me, or maybe there's too much generator noise at the back and so I can't hear you. And then we looked at their circuits in the brain. Okay. And here's what's amazing. So on on one side you see the reading circuits for Hindi, and on one side you see the reading circuits for English. This was the first time people were looking at biliterate kids. And you can see that the reading pathways are almost identical. Okay. You can also begin to see how there are regions at this part of the brain, this part of the brain, this part of the brain, all getting activated if you just follow those red paths that are there. Okay? So children are very much showing those same pathways for the ones that they learn, the ones who learn to read well. Okay? And they form new connections. But what happens when children don't learn to read that? And that's what we saw in these classrooms. Okay, that not everybody was reading at the same level, but children were reading differently. Okay, and that's how I discovered and understood and began to read about dyslexia. Okay, and dyslexia is the inability to develop skilled reading skills, not reading, but skilled reading skills, despite intelligence, opportunity, and instruction. So if you haven't got enough exposure, that doesn't come under dyslexia. The understanding is that you have had enough instruction in the classroom. And now we know that the numbers are as high as 15 to 20% of dyslexia. So 1 in 5 kids might be at risk for dyslexia. That's as many as 35 million children in India. And only about 5 out of those 100 kids receive assistance. So if you know a family who's been worried because their children are not reading well, please share this information for them. We just discussed that at a panel on neurodiversity, on how the incidence of learning differences is so huge and we need to be more aware of it. And here's what the reading network for a child with dyslexia and without dyslexia can look like. So you can see how the level of activity, if yellow is the high level of activity that you see in a normal or typically reading child, you can see how the level of activity is less for a child who is not reading at that level. But remember, we have neuroplasticity. So using the same principles of practice, you can remediate dyslexia. You cannot cure it, but you can accommodate it. And that's why neuroplasticity is such a superpower. It not only enables you to learn, it also enables you by practice to learn at your own pace. And that's something that we need to leverage. Okay? But something that is also important to remember is children who have dyslexia also have other abilities. So some of them have strengths like they are picture thinkers, or they are able to find the odd one out in an array of pictures very quickly. So just before I end, I want to share with you one interesting experiment we did, which is something that you probably do on a regular basis. So probably every day you must be sending at least 100 text messages or 50 WhatsApp messages or maybe 15 WhatsApp messages. And 85% of people in India send them using the Roman text, but they're actually communicating in Hindi or Marathi or Gujarati or Bangla or whatever. Okay? So, this is an extremely difficult process if you think about it from a reading angle, because you have the phonology of one language active, but the writing system of another which is active. Okay? So, that's the example up there where you have all these ads, which is so Jane Bhi Do Yaro is written in using the English script, okay? And nobody's taught you the phonetics of that transcription, but you've picked it up along the way. So we wanted to see what is the effort on the brain when you are doing this day after day, time after time. Okay? So, sorry. When we looked at people doing this, we did it under three conditions. When you do it in Hindi, when you do it in English, and when you do it in, we call this new script Romanagri. Okay? Roman for the Devanagari script. Okay? You find that people actually do things much faster when they are doing them in the native language. English comes number two, but Romanagari takes the longest amount of time. That's the time taken to do it. And the accuracy is also lowest in Romanagari. But when you look at the brain, look at the topmost figure, and you can see how much more effort you are putting in to actually do that. Okay? And that effort is actually the attention network of your brain. Okay? So when you are texting in Romanagari, you are actually focusing really hard. And so next time your friend says, "एक minute रुक जा, message खत्म करना है," it's because that effort is going in keeping all those things active. Okay? So you're really strengthening that attention network is what we believe. We've never followed this up with another study to see whether after a period of texting in Romanagari, that actually happens. But that's a hypothesis out there. Okay? I want to end by saying that there is, in a time and an age when we are becoming more passive consumers of media, given the advantages of reading, it's time that you started to read much more. So if you are able to find aside 15 more minutes starting today, given how much your brain improves from reading, I would say this has been a successful presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this wonderful talk. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. So we're going to do a 15 minutes of Q&A. If you have any questions, please raise your hand.
Great.
Hello, ma'am. Thank you for the amazing talk. So I would like to know.
Localization. Show me.
Yeah,
Okay.
here,
Great.
here.
Thank you.
Yes. So I would like to know, do bilingual or multilingual people find it easier to learn a new language as compared to monolinguals?
So there is certainly some of the existing literature does seem to suggest that you, because as bilinguals or multilinguals, your repertoire of sounds that you have learnt is larger, that you will be able to learn a new language maybe faster. However, it's a little difficult to generalize that, because we also know that languages come from belong to families. Okay, so there are certain sets of sounds that you are exposed to and some that you are not. So if you're learning a language from the same family, we do know that's going to be faster. Across families, that doesn't necessarily generalize. But there are people called polyglots who learn to speak 15 and 20 languages effortlessly. They are a unique species.
Is it related to learning musical notes by any chance?
Actually, the reverse. there is some evidence to suggest that people who have learnt music are tuned to learning newer languages faster, simply because of enhanced auditory processing. Okay, but that people who speak many languages will learn music well, that's not been demonstrated so far.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I have a question. So, it's related to the way we think. So, some people hear an internal voice in their head that communicates their thoughts. Other people see words as their way of thinking. So, is there a difference in the way they learn, or do people who think in words naturally have an affinity for reading faster? I don't know. Is there a link between the two?
It's not a very easy question to answer, simply because I don't think it's been ever looked at with those angles. However, we do know that there is something called rehearsal that we do in our head before we speak. Okay? Some of it is conscious rehearsal, some of it is unconscious. Okay? And that has given rise to the idea that many of us, as a consequence, when we are talking to somebody, often end up even preparing a response before having heard the full question. Okay? So that can sometimes conflict as a consequence in response. But to come to your question on whether people who are doing it visually versus those who are doing response, it's not clear that at the same point in time or for the same tasks, the same person might be doing covert rehearsal in one individual and visualizing in the other. You tend to use a lot of visual memory when you are writing. Okay, so you say that the spelling doesn't seem right to me, and you use that a lot there. But it's primarily limited from what the data says so far in the modality in which it is being tested. So if you're looking at visual recognition, you're using more of visual. But when you're listening to people speak, then you're using more of auditory rehearsal. But in terms of whether either of them end up reading more or read faster, no evidence to date that I'm aware of.
Hello. Does neuroplasticity induce epigenetic changes, or epigenetics induces neuroplasticity changes?
If I knew the answer to that, I might be a contender for the next Nobel Prize. Unfortunately not. We don't yet know. We do know that epigenetics is a player in neuroplasticity. Directionality, I'm afraid we don't know too much about. Still early days.
Thank you so much for the great talk and
Thank
for
you.
teaching me my first Marathi phrase.
Thank you.
I was just curious about if reading through other systems like Braille also involves similar mechanisms in the brain.
Yes, you'll be surprised to know that even when people learn Braille, they do develop networks that that go from the somatosensory cortex, that is the touch cortex, to the visual cortex. Okay. What's interesting is even here you can see a role for spoken language come in. So it's a slightly complex network, but this word form area that I talked about, that location is quite distinct in the context of Braille versus others. But the mechanism is very similar to what I've talked about here today. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. First of all, thank you for the lovely talk. I'm here on the right.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for explaining, because my daughter enjoyed how her mind works.
Brilliant.
So that's what we were here. Ma'am, I need to know from you, how is neuroplasticity being explored in the field of giftedness, twice exceptionality, and thrice exceptionality?
So I'm afraid I don't know what is twice and thrice exceptionality. I am aware of giftedness. So what I hope, and there are just too many interventions out there for all of us to validate and evaluate, is it's not clear how many of the interventions are actually evidence-based. Okay? There are a lot of hypotheses out there on what might work and what might not work. How many of them get tested before they get into intervention is the biggest challenge that we are grappling with right now. There's just, I'm afraid, too much voodoo science out there. Okay? And that's where it's very important for parents as well as educators to be conscious of what the science is, or before an intervention is taught to them, to ask that the evidence that this intervention will succeed be provided to them. That's one request. There are just too many of them out there. The second is, we also know that given that children learn differently, what works for one might not necessarily work on the other. But the basis for all interventions is neuroplasticity. Okay? So it's important, I'm afraid, at your end for you to ascertain that the child is benefiting, one. And secondly, to adopt what is called a response to intervention-based approach. Is not wait for infinity to be able to see the results. You should be able to see results in as quickly as 12 weeks. If you're not seeing results, you need to certainly go back and ask what is the basis for the intervention or whether it needs a tailoring.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So you mean that the 12-week time period is the ideal time period?
It's not ideal, but it's a wide enough window where you will see some change. In some kids, it'll be 6 weeks, in some it'll be 4, in some it'll be 12, in some it might be 14. But you will begin to see some change. For me, I think the exercise methodology works the best. You know, you do it for 8 days and you walk around. It's important for you to do it for 8 days continuously. If you take a break after 3 days, when you go back on the 5th day, you're going to have a trouble completing your rounds. Okay? So the same principle of exercise that you do for health works in the brain too. Okay? So that regularity and practice is important. And that's why we are emphasizing, in fact, even more, to make the intervention fun, so that the child can look forward to it and it's not a boring intervention. And that's where technology can actually be helpful. Or activities at home can be helpful, if you're creative about them.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank
Sure.
you.
Hello, ma'am. Hi, over here.
Okay. Thank you.
Wonderful talk. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And I had a question regarding neuroplasticity. So with disorders like Alzheimer's or dementia, you often hear of patients who start to forget, people's names or their own identity. But you never really hear about them, forgetting how to read. So why is it that the brain still retains its ability to read, but not other important things like the person's own identity?
So one of the things we must be aware of in terms of Alzheimer's and dementia is it's primarily a problem with short-term memory. Okay, so a lot of activities about whether you ate food, whether you sort of put your buttons or whatever, those are things that people forget the most. In terms of long-term abilities, so if a particular area is affected, so name recall, okay, is primarily located in one area of the brain. Okay, it's close to the superior temporal gyrus. But reading is a circuit. Okay, so you have to really mess up parts of the circuit to forget everything about reading. One. Second, there is also something called the visual word form area that I talked about, which, if preserved, can help a lot in the reading process. So what you might find is people might have challenges learning new words, but a lot of activities which have become automatized, they are able to read. So they will be able to read that something that they've been doing on a regular basis. Also, because name storage or naming also involves the hippocampus, which is significantly impacted in dementia. That's the other reason why, in terms of name recall, becomes a challenge. So there's a colleague of mine who actually used this to great advantage to try and diagnose dementia in women in rural South India, when they started to forget the names of the gods with whom they were doing puja. Okay? So it's a regular automatic activity. You would think that they would not forget it. Okay? So this gets stored now in your long-term memory. Okay? And when they started to forget, she knew that this was dementia. But when she asked them to learn to read, like you said, they were able to do it because the components of the process of what they put together were in place. And the nature of the circuit actually came to their rescue to be able to hold on to reading. There's a condition called alexia, though, that happens, where you might have a stroke. And that can immediately change your abilities. Next day, you can open the newspaper and you can't read. It just doesn't make any sense to you. And that's because that stroke has happened in a region in the temporal lobe. And that location of the stroke is actually telling you what ability you might have lost. So it's a tenuous, complicated game, but I think we are gradually beginning to understand it a little better.
All right.
Ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, thank you for a very stimulating talk. Okay, so I had a question about, reading at the level of inferential understanding and beyond that. Okay, basically inferential understanding and higher order thinking with respect to, let's say, Bloom's taxonomy. Okay, so with respect to that, what is it that you can share? If let's say somebody wants to accelerate that, reading, there is reading and there is reading at the level of inferential understanding and beyond that, right? So what can be done to enhance that and accelerate that? Thank you.
So enhancing that is probably much more intervention at a behavioral level where you develop a whole taxonomy or a format to ask and work with individuals on the purposes of their reading. It's a much more involved activity, which very difficult to study under functional imaging, much better to study under behavioral intervention as well as cognitive processing. But you are able to see minor differences in activity at the functional level. Little difficult to discuss with you. It's a little complicated, so maybe we'll do it offline. Shivana?
Ma'am, one
Yeah.
question.
Sorry,
yeah,
just wave
yeah.
your hand.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. Thank you.
So, I think when we were oral society, we had a different kind of cognition. Whereas we moved now towards literacy, our cognition changed. Now we are moving towards a digital age. Everyone has phone, we play games, and it has a different impact on our cognition. So do you have any thoughts like what impact, or like is there any studies like how digital media and digital interaction changing us? And
Very little. We still haven't done enough work on that. And unfortunately, we don't have enough studies documented yet in terms of a cognitive angle from the oral tradition. In fact, there are a couple of people who think that we might actually go back to oral tradition again because we will just talk to our phones and we will no longer read. That's a possibility. But there is some emerging research to show that reading online is reducing to some extent the inferential processing which the other gentleman was talking about. We are not reading deeply enough because reading deeply enough requires some thought, focus, and introspection. We read very peripherally and just, on the top of things. We don't pause and contemplate enough of them, and therefore inferential understanding might actually be getting impacted. So there is a conscious move from reading researchers to encourage children and parents to read from books, to write along with books, because the process of writing also consolidates the pathways for reading, because you learn to make the sound letter associations better. That's about what we know of. The advantage with the digital format, which I like to emphasize, is a lot of these intervention and practices that we're talking about, making these sound letter associations and all, those can be gamified, okay? And that gamification is something that children can begin to enjoy, but in the process end up learning. So I think it's really up to us to decide what we want to use where, and if we can use it optimally, then it'll really be the right kind of marriage.
Thank you so much for all of your questions. That was our last question for the talk. Thank you so much, Dr. Singh, for this amazing talk. I can see how much everyone has loved your talk, and thank you for answering all the questions with so much enthusiasm.